Hello YouTube, and welcome to another episode of The Educated Barbarian. If you remember last time, we left on the realization that humankind went through several different ages. Ages where they worshipped different entities, different beings. And every single time, this has a direct impact on the shape of men and on the content of their characters. So, to quickly recap, humanity started to develop the concept of faith as a way to use pain to access a higher level of spirituality. That is what Nietzsche called ancient faith. It was a constant conflict between reason and the ability to believe in something bigger than the self, which still aligned with will to power, because very powerful men would seek in God the ability to actually find a superior, to find a way to actually confront their strength with something greater than them. And that was seen by Nietzsche as greatly beneficial. But it only lasted for a time, because this was the religion of the aristocrats, who quickly got outnumbered by the plebeians, the slaves. And this is when slave morality started to actually poison religion, and the content of religion was replaced by something else. These were people whose condition in life was tainted by pain, and they couldn't actually live with that fact. They hated the fact that pain was an integral part of religion, so they tried to replace it with something else. In a sense, these were the types that deeply hated nature because they saw their condition as imposed on them by nature, and therefore this god of nature, that was the ancient god, had to be replaced by a different one, a god that wouldn't make them suffer, a god that would make their life as slaves as justified, and not even that, but revert the entire situation and, in a sense, invert their position, their social statuses, and turn their weaknesses into strength. This is how these people, the slave insurrection, tried to turn will to survival into will to power. And it managed to do that beautifully, as explained by Nietzsche. This, in a sense, outnumbering of the aristocrats, this revolt of the plebeians, is the direct reason why the Christianity and the religion that we know as of today is not the one that our ancestors used to live with. And therefore, it also has a direct impact and a direct influence on us modern men, because we are at the end of the chain. We are living the times that Nietzsche describes as the post-moral age. And you could say, okay, it's great, post-moral, we did away with morals. But in reality, it's not the case, and you know it. Morality is still an integral part of our lives, and yet God is not present anymore. So what exactly has happened to us? Well, this is what we're going to be discussing in this video, where I'm going to focus mainly on modernity, the understanding that Nietzsche has of the concept, and his diagnosis of our condition. Because if in the past, in part one, we spoke about ancient faith, and then we spoke about its death and the death of God, now we're going to look at the world with a dead God. What happens to this universe when it has done away with its creator? Well, first off, let us start by reminding ourselves that in the eyes of Nietzsche, all religion is an attempt at world organizing and world explaining. It's always been the case. So even in its most primitive form, and then its transformation into what we know nowadays as Christianity, it was always, in a sense, an attempt by humans to explain the world around them. Because humans don't like the uncertain. We always want to be able to give an explanation to things, even if we don't have it yet. And it's the reason why it, in a sense, is true that there is a regression of religion nowadays, because we have scientific methods that allow us to explain things that in the past were not explainable. So religion has regressed as a natural, in a sense, development of the human species that has now, in a sense, a better mean of explaining the world around them. And yet religion is still around us and present. And that is for the simple reason that it is always going to be necessary in the minds of some people to be able to explain things that science will not be able to explain. For example, why are we here? These are more philosophical questions, but they explain the reason why religion isn't going anywhere. There is this mindset, and maybe you think that I think that because I just expressed it, that as humanity evolves, religion is going to disappear because religion is a primitive trait. I disagree with that. I think religion is a human trait. It's always going to be around because the need to explain our existence and the need to know where we come from and our direction is one that will never perish. And therefore, it's also understood in Nietzschean philosophy that the death of God was a bad thing because it was not replaced by anything valuable in terms of answers. Actually, quite the opposite. A world without God, the world of modernity that we live in nowadays, was seen as Nietzsche as a hellscape, as the worst possible environment for humans to exist in. Because, unlike what you might think, we did not do away with all of the bad things that religion actually brought with it. For example, idolatry. Idolatry is still present, but the only difference is that nowadays the worshippers don't worship God, they worship something else. It's why I said that religion is a human trait. You will not stop humans from worshipping things that they perceive to be bigger than them. They will always find something else. So it's going to be the TV, a celebrity, the media, even a product, consumerism, concepts that might be directly damaging to a person in particular, but that will not stop them from actually following that thing blindly. And therefore, what was left after God actually exited the world was that, the meaning. Meaning exited the world. Back in the days with ancient faith, you would worship God because you understood what you would get in return. You would get a higher spirituality, you would find a way to improve and to actually endure something that would actually make you stronger. Nowadays, all of these temptations, all of these trials of like worship, for example, are still present, but there's no benefits attached to it. The benefits has left the world along with God. When God died, all of the benefits of worship also died with it. What remained was mostly the pessimism of the non-believer. Because of course, this religion that we see nowadays, even in people who call themselves religious, this belief is a belief that is deeply linked with pessimism and with non-belief in truth. It's something I explained in the previous video. There was a slow degradation of faith because questionings started to occur. And the more you question religion, the more it falls apart because it's not supposed to be a system of belief built upon facts. It's supposed to be built upon faith. But that is something that is impossible to perceive for us nowadays because we are dealing with the fruits of faith without absurdity, which in reality means that there is no faith anymore because faith is in the absurd. I've already discussed that in length. So we are now left as modern men with belief without hope, meaning that the innate hope attached to the figure of God, of eternal mercifulness, all of that is gone. And yet the belief is still there. The belief in what? The belief in morality. This is a theme that is recurrent with Nietzsche, where he insists on showing us that the morality that we espouse, one, came from somewhere, it didn't just fall from the trees, it came from Christianity, but two, is now entirely vacant of any meaning, because the meaning attached to morality was the figure of God. It was the ability to attach it to religion. It's the reason why morality is so flimsy nowadays and feels so fake. It's because it's now attached to a false idol and a false God, the false God of modernity. And it's interesting because even before looking at that at our social level, Nietzsche also diagnosed that at a philosophical level, because to him, philosophers are always either the announcers or the first observers of changes when it comes to mankind. And so for him, this type of pessimism, the pessimism attached to a morality empty, a godless morality in a sense, was particularly present in the person of Schopenhauer. And he actually pinpointed that, and he gave, in a sense, the nature of that thing. He described that pessimism as a half Christian, half German sensibility. And if you've watched the previous episode, you know that these two things don't go hand in hand, because the spirit of the race of the German people and the people of the North made it so that they had a very tough time accepting the religion as it was. Blind faith was not something that was well received. So what is a half Christian, half German sensibility? It's a bastard sensibility. It's a bastardized sensibility. One that mixes two extremes. One that mixes things that shouldn't be mixed. And again, if you remember last time we discussed the mixings of the Ancient and the New Testament. That is presented as something natural, but is anything but that. It creates a monstrosity because it's very tough to reconcile. And so in this case, the best way I could sum it up is a naive exaltation that meets a blasé skepticism. And that is the person of Schopenhauer. Again, Nietzsche was extremely critical about the philosophers of his time and of the past. He did not think they were doing a good job, and so he was sometimes very vitriolic with his words, and the same goes for Schopenhauer. He points at Schopenhauer as the perfect example of someone who was not connected to God anymore, had no faith anymore, and yet was still stuck in a rut, was still stuck with a dead God, with a dead idol. Because if you've read Schopenhauer, I could sum him up by saying that he tried to establish a basis of ethics, but he never really realized that the morality that he based his basis of ethics upon was that of an empty Christianity. It was the values that were passed down upon himself by his ancestors in the spirit of the race, in the spirit of the place where he lived, but it didn't resonate with him because he was lacking the faith to actually interpret them correctly. So instead, he was engaging in what can only be truly described as empty Christianity. And here I'm going to quote Nietzsche directly because he says something that I found humorous but also quite telling. Schopenhauer, a pessimist, a repudiator of God and of the wood, who makes a halt at morality and plays the flute, is that really a pessimist? The flute thing might sound strange and it might look like a dig, but I think that what Nietzsche meant here is that there was clearly some naivety to Schopenhauer. There was some hope to him. And it's something you see nowadays still to this day, where the disciples of Schopenhauer, in a sense, the doomers, the black-pilled people who look at the world with a very pessimistic approach, have also in them a dash of hope. Their pessimism is no true pessimism. It is always one that hopes to be proven wrong. That hopes that by saying something like God is dead, there is no God, and we need to reinvent the world without him, they hope that a voice is going to come from the sky to actually guide them and tell them, no, you are wrong, my son, I am still there, I am still alive. But that voice never comes, and therefore they are confirmed in their pessimism. But it's not something that makes them happy. Anyone who has this very downtrodden view of life would want nothing more than to be able to not have it. But because no one else is going to change it for them, they stick with it because they see it as the truth. And yet, for the most part, that type of morality is based, again, on empty hope, a hope that is never satisfied because the figure that would actually satisfy that hope, God, is not there anymore. And there is no true word renunciation in that. Just like there is no true morality to be found in godless worshippers of empty tenets, and that's us. Nietzsche just shat on morality entirely because we are based on a system of belief that comes directly from Christianity that we don't espouse anymore. Most Christian countries nowadays are like this. They have done away with the religion, but they kept the morality. But that's the worst part to keep. That's the worst part of religion. It's the skeleton of religion, but without the flesh around it. So there's not much hope for it. And it's the reason why it's rotting away. It's the reason why if you listen to people who are described as reactionary, the first thing they point out is morals. Morals are disappearing. Morals are not there anymore. Why? Well, the explanation is simple. It's because what kept these morals alive, their real backbone ideologically, was religion. They needed a new backbone to survive in this modern world. But the issue is that no one was there to actually provide it. And so it is no true renunciation of the word. It's what I already explained with the fake pessimism that you see a lot nowadays. And also that fake morality. If we were to try to find a response, because there must be a response, right? We're not doomed to actually be stuck with a system of morals that cannot be used. We could only access such a truth in the understanding of what is beyond the historical construction of God, good and evil. And that is why Nietzsche actually named his book Beyond Good and Evil. It's because for him, he saw the world, he saw the situation in which he was, and he understood what was going to happen in the future. He was perfectly aware of that. But he also understood that we couldn't do away with morals. He is not opposed to morals. What he's opposed to is these empty tenets that actually have no impact, no meanings, and cannot be utilized. So, what exactly could be the solution for that? Well, the opening of the eyes is the opposite ideal. It's the opposite ideal to the man who clings to Christian morality but doesn't have any faith in himself. That guy is not the solution. And the guy before him, the guy who had faith and morality, is also in Nietzsche's eyes not a solution either, because he had his flaws, and also because he doesn't exist anymore. Men of that caliber are not to be found anymore. So what is the next natural step? What can we as modern men hope to become to be able to actually restore some sense to the wood, some meaning to the wood? Because again, God is not going to bring it. Well, what Nietzsche says is that the type of man that will be needed is the most wood-approving, exuberant man who has not only learned to compose with nature, but also wishes to have it as it was and is for all eternity. And in those two lines, there is the idea of the Übermensch. If you have read Thus Spoke Zarathustra, just in those two lines, every single thing you need to know about the Übermensch is contained. He is wood-approving. He doesn't try to renunciate the wood. If you remember episode 1, I told you that Nietzsche had a problem with the Jewish faith because he saw it as wood renunciation, but a toxic version of it that hoped to attain the treasures of living in paradise, so after death. And to him, this was a one-way ticket to hell. He also sees the Übermensch as someone who's exuberant, not a stoic, not someone who's reserved, someone who is full of life, whose will to power is full to the brim and ready to explode, but who controls it and lets it explode on its own terms. Someone who has learned to compose with nature, not someone who detests nature, not a slave that looks at his condition and thinks, okay, I am downtrodden and a slave and I suffer. I do not accept nature, the nature that made me as such, as a worthy God. This is Satan. It is Satan that made me like this. I will replace Satan with a God of love and kindness that is going to make me feel better about being weak. That is the slave insurrection. The Übermensch is not like that. He accepts nature for what it is. He learns to compose with nature and also wants it to stay the way it is. No transformation of nature. What could be the best way to describe modernity? Modernity refuses to accept nature as is, to the point that sometimes you question the self and think, okay, are we afraid of nature? Why do we live in towers of concrete? Why do we cut the trees so much? What is the problem with us? Well, I think that part of it is because we're trying to extirpate ourselves from nature, because it reminds us of who we truly are deep down, of the creatures that we are. The Übermensch doesn't function like that. The Übermensch is actually quite connected with nature and wants nature to remain for what it is. He doesn't try to actually fight against it. He tries to be its best actor. So that was for the quote-unquote introduction of this segment. Now, let's look at the opposite of what I just described, because sadly, and it's a point that actually some people bring up and are correct, Übermensches are not very common, meaning that it's a rare commodity. You don't come across a Übermensch every single day. It's because it takes a lot of work. However, the opposite of the Übermensch, the modern man, the Untermensch, is extremely prevalent. Actually, it's most people. So why exactly is that species so prevalent? How did they manipulate the wood, and how did they actually manage to multiply so fiercely, and what is their ideal? Well, their ideal and their new god is one that you see nowadays in the world, and that is the god of science. I've explained it previously, but God never truly leaves. He just gets replaced. The god of ancient faith was replaced by a god made of plastic, and that god is the god of science. This is still a god whose goal is to explain the world. That's exactly what science does. It seeks to explain the world. It still taps into the human instinct of wanting to know everything. And therefore, the creation of this religion of science is just like the creation of every religion. It's an attempt to intellectualize the world and clarify its mechanisms, which also explains why the modern man is so scientifically inclined. It's because he simply opted for a seemingly more efficient God. If you ask more people nowadays, hey, why do you believe in science and not in God? They'll tell you, well, because science is correct. Science is the truth. Is it actually accurate? I don't know. It's not even the question I'm going to answer today. The only thing I want you to know is that this is the reason why they follow it. Even if it were not to be true, they would still follow it. Why? Because they just went for the stronger God. What is the stronger God? It's the God that knows most. in battles of the god that is the most omnipotent is the one that is going to be victorious every single time, because humans will only follow things that are vastly superior to them, and they will pick the most superior out of all of the options available, which explains again the prevalence of science in this modern age. It's not because men became smarter. Most people nowadays who love science don't understand the first thing about science. They only understand instinctively that this is the God to follow, because the vast majority of people follow that God, whether they actually want to believe it or not. And also, it is the God that is the most powerful nowadays, at least in Western countries. For this part of history, at least in Western countries, we will see, because modernity is a beast that endlessly devours, and its God, the God of science, is of the same ilk. So there is a strong possibility that countries that still are adepts of the ancient faith now, in 50 years will have adopted modernity entirely, and therefore they will have adopted this new God as well. And you need to understand that this has a direct impact and a direct connection with the way we interact with our environment as humans, because the space around us grows with the strength of our vision. And our vision is the understanding of the world. Meaning that if you pick a God that allows you to understand the world fully, your vision also increases. And the more it increases, the more power you have, the more powerful the God that you actually are going to serve is going to be, and the more likely you are to continue serving him. And it's also vice versa, by the way. The opposite is also true. The strength of our vision grows the space around us. It's what science does beautifully well. It allows you to start to actually understand pockets and realms of our universe that were never explored before. Look at space exploration. This is one of the many things that the God of science has done. It has opened the eyes of people towards new horizons, and therefore it is extremely precious to these people. Likewise, in the field of medicine, all things that in reality are achievements by this God that confirm its status as a superior being that is worthy of being followed, because all forms of knowledge participate in the game of vision, and therefore they can also become corrupted by system of thoughts seeking to provide absolute answers. And this is what had happened also to the God of ancient faith. The issue with ancient faith was that it started to face problems that it couldn't explain. Or if it could explain it, the explanation was flimsy, or it refused to give an explanation, which is perfectly normal, by the way. Again, faith is not to be explained. But because the age of the rational male was starting to becoming full bloom with the Enlightenment period in France, for example, where l'esprit cartésien, the Cartesian spirit, was at the center of the scientific process and science was blooming as a whole, when it was confronted with the God of the ancient faith, science could explain things much better than the ancient God of Christianity could. And therefore, this is also what participated in the defeat of this ancient God. People do not want to follow a defeated God. But the issue is that the second you confront God with science, God has already lost, because God doesn't exist on that level. God doesn't have the empirical ability to explain the phenomenon that are going to actually make the world the way it is. And it's why you still have people nowadays who debunk the Bible or debunk the Quran. Why? They apply a scientific mindset to a book that is not scientific at all, and it's not supposed to be scientific. Now, as for the corruption portion of it, you should also understand by this point that if the ancient God could be corrupted, then this new God of science can also become corrupted, because any type of religion, again, seeks to explain the world, but it always goes too far. It always goes that extra mile that creates its own doom, because it cannot just stop at 80%. It has to explain everything. And this is when it falters. For example, again, science cannot explain the soul. And therefore, because it cannot explain the soul, what does it say? That it doesn't exist. Why? It cannot accept that there are things outside of its understanding, because science is just an extension of mankind, just like God is mostly a creation of the human spirit. It's the representation of what we wished existed out there so that we can actually explain the world around us. Science is in the same vein, but the issue is that it is, just like us, highly corruptible, and therefore, because we constantly try to create system of thoughts that provide absolute answers, and because absolute answers simply do not exist, we constantly create gods that are fallible and they eventually die. The only thing we do with these attempts is we restrain our own field of vision with things such as dogmatism and the hubris of the pro-truth Mensch. The fact that men are obsessed with truth is also the reason why they are completely incapable of accessing truth. We do not have the necessary tools to access something like this because we are subjective creatures, which is also the reason why it's so funny that nowadays modern men would embrace the God of science and proclaim that he is the objective God. They don't understand they're doing the exact same thing their ancestors did. Every religion has an objective God. Every religion will tell you that their God is objectively better and knows everything. Is that true? I don't know, but it's always been proven wrong throughout the years. So why would this one be any different? Now, there is something to be discussed here, and that is the mindset, but also the time period that has made the creation of this new God possible. And it's one thing that I'm sure you're going to relate with because it connects with the concept of capitalism and of a labor-heavy society. Nietzsche touches on that because he discusses the industriousness of the spirit, and that is the constant need and will of humans to work and work and work. But in the understanding that Nietzsche has of humans, this is not natural at all. Apparently, according to him, this is something that was planted there. And there is a lot of interesting things to discuss if we are going to talk about that, because the nature of industriousness is, by definition, anti-spiritual, because it detests the type of idle-mindedness that self-discovery, and therefore connection with a higher being, requires. And this is why nowadays, if you listen to people talk about prayer, for example, they cannot grasp it. It's not in bad faith, it's just that they cannot intellectually grasp the idea of joining your hands on or prostrating yourself and praying to a being that you can't see with your eyes. It makes no sense to them because scientifically speaking, it has no value. But on the basis of faith, it has a ton of value. And anyone who is a religious man or woman in the comment is going to be able to vouch for it. So that speaks to the disconnection between spirituality and industriousness. Industriousness that dictates that you must be constantly in movement, you must be constantly productive, which is really the mantra of this modern world. A mantra that, if you've been paying attention, is starting to fall apart because modern men and women are starting to revolt against that. They're starting to question the necessity for being hyper-productive all the time. They're starting to actually question who benefits from it the most. This is why you see all of that contestation towards capitalism nowadays. It's not even just the system that they're contesting, it's who created it and who benefits from it the most. And in a sense, what they're doing is they're doing the exact same thing that happened to the ancient God of faith, the God of Christianity, when people started to question who benefited from the clerical order and if this actual entity was beneficial to their lives or not. Now, whether you have an answer for that is something you can share in the comments, but it's something to point out because this contempt and this almost disgust, in a sense, with which modernity regards prayer, for example, so man, I forgot that word. Oh damn, that's bad. How can I forget that word? The expression of ancient faith shows also that there's a chance that people in the future are going to be entirely disconnected with the struggles of our days. They will not understand why we struggled against modernity so much. They might even, in a sense, yearn for it, just like many people nowadays yearn for ancient faith. But it's because they are not living in the times that we're living in nowadays. And so that contempt, again, which is a contempt towards the state of perpetual readiness for the coming of God, according to Nietzsche, characterizes the laborious races, whose workhorse mentality and resentment for aristocratic leisure are two faces of the same coin. And this is when we get into a more historical discussion, because for the modern man to exist, something had to happen. Again, if we look at the spirit of the race, it is evident that there had to be something happening to the European race for the God of Christianity to install itself. And what was that? It was the slave insurrection. So then, after the death of God, when a new God was going to come onto the scene, what exactly happened for us to be prepared, to be in the right state of mind, and to modify the spirit of the race so as to make it actually congruent with that new God? My explanation and my answer is not one that Nietzsche provides. I think it's the industrial revolution. I think that this is what created the proper environment for that new type of worship, because we shifted from a mean and a way of living that was mostly focused on leisure with some pockets of work here and there, where work was not in your entire life, with a way of life nowadays where we are pretty much workhorses. It's most of what we do. Work is seen as the most important thing, and we have a deep resentment for, again, the type of leisure that we associate with laziness and also with aristocratic tastes. It's vastly what taints and what colors the discussion around the French Revolution, for example. If you look at the explanation as to why the aristocrats had to go, it's because they were described as parasites. But what does that mean? Well, they were not providing, they were not being productive, and therefore it was seen as them benefiting off of the back of the working class, that they themselves were like working hands that were just slaving away for the benefit of one queen. And that was seen as unacceptable. And it's something that I perfectly understand, by the way. But you need to get that all this is part of the same mindset. There needed to be something at the level of conscience to happen to shift us away from the mindset that would reject work. We have been, in a sense, engineered to love work. And that makes us offsprings of the Industrial Revolution, because we are now the inheritance of an ideology that denies the dishonorable nature of work, and instead encourages humans to find in it the reason for their existence. And this is when we finally get to the topic of meaning, because if the God of science is the new God of humanity, then he must bring meaning to the world, not just explanation. He explains the mechanisms of the planet, but what type of meaning does he bring to our lives? The God of Christianity, the God of the ancient faith, was actually there to explain why humans were there. We were made after his image, we were there to serve him on earth, to be able to access paradise. But what about the God of science? There is no paradise of science. So what exactly is his requirements? What does he want from us? Well, what he wants from us is to find meaning in the work we do. Once you hear that, it's very easy to also pinpoint the type of individuals that would benefit from us following that type of God, aka les patrons, aka the great capital, aka the people who own everything, and who therefore would greatly like it if the people that work under them not only worked, but also saw work as the finite reason for their existence, something that Nietzsche denies entirely. Now, as someone who is like this, hyperproductive and a soldier ant, it's tough for me to wrap my head around, but I cannot deny that there seems to be some truth in his words. There seems to be some truth in the idea that at some point, at the civilizational level, there had to be a shift, and that shift seems to be what I already described for you. We have now a new goal for existence, a goal that apparently also doesn't make us happy, because many people nowadays have a deeply rooted resentment for work. So we went from people who had a resentment for leisure to people that now have a resentment for work. It's like we're looping back and forth. But the issue is that we're not really looping, we're devolving. Because the disgust for aristocratic leisure is still there, but now we also detest work. So what else is left for us? Well, I guess only the future will tell. But on this very idea, Nietzsche had this to say. Proud laboriousness prepares for unbelief more than anything else. It dissolves religious instincts so that humans no longer know what purposes religions serve and regard their existence with a dull astonishment. It's why I said that we're not going anywhere and we're not actually progressing. The fact that we have now started to resent the idea that work is our entire existence and the reason for our lives doesn't make up for the fact that we are not able to go back and find that reason. A reason that used to exist. Religion gave us that reason. It's the reason why it also cracks me up when I hear atheists say that they are evolved. Like they're the next step of evolution for mankind. but you are an inferior compared to a man of faith of the past. He at least knew where he came from and where he was going. You are completely clueless when it comes to such things. And this new age of laboriousness was, in a sense, the direct reason why God died as well. The more industries we built, the more we lost ourselves in work, the less time we had to be idle. And as I already said, the only way to actually connect with God is to be idle. It's to be able to actually have that perpetual readiness for the coming of God. So the less time you have to think about things like this, the less time you have to actually connect spiritually, which is why so many people nowadays are spiritually bankrupt. It's not because they don't have the ability for it, it's because they don't really know what purpose it serves, and they have no time to actually connect with that. They don't have the space to do that. So our religious instincts that were part of the spirit of the race have been dissolved to the benefit of something else, the instinct for work. And so the purpose of religion has gone away, and our existences are now just shrouded in gloom. It's why many people nowadays are depressed, I think. It's because they don't know where they come from, but they also don't know where they're going, and nothing could be worse than that. One could think that ants, for example, that I used as an example, might actually have a religious system. We don't know that. Just like with bees. Why do soldier bees or why do worker bees slave away for the queen? We see it as just part of the race. We see it as spirit of the race, like they don't have a choice. But maybe they have a religion. Maybe the queen is their god. We don't know that. And if that were the case, it would explain why they do it. They sacrifice themselves and they sacrifice their logic so as to put it to the service of a greater being and accept pain to actually develop their potential and connect spiritually. We don't have that anymore. We are the worker bees that have lost the queen bee, and the queen bee has been replaced by a bee made of metal. Is it a better bee? Nietzsche says no, because it makes us just as miserable, but now we don't even have the benefits of knowing why we're miserable. So that is the story, that is the DNA of the modern Mensch. The modern Mensch that, as I said, is already so preoccupied by the buzzing of the swarm that he has no time left for religion. And therefore, because he has no time left for religion, but because men constantly yearn for a god and for something to explain the world around them and themselves, they just moved on to more potent opium like capitalism, nationalism, hedonism. All that is incredibly important to understand. If you hear the l'opium du peuple, opium of the people, you will immediately connect that to Marxist rhetoric, because it's the way religion was described. It was described as opium, but why? Because it gave people a soothing mean to explain their sufferings and to push them further in life. But it was seen as a bad thing, which is idiotic, because nowadays we have the same thing. Look at the type of people that are addicted to social media, to drugs, to all types of means to cope with their existence. They consume opium still to this day, but no one points it out. Why? Because the God that is providing us with that opium nowadays is still in charge. That type of critique or that level of understanding of the trap that we've fallen into will only be present in the future, or when it is present, like people who question capitalism or nationalism, they are only able to perceive one type of opium, but not the one they're actively smoking. And that is the sad truth of the human condition. You will be able to point out what someone else is doing wrong, but not what you are doing wrong. And this is why we're stuck in that perpetual loop of looking for a new God, that God dies, and we replace him with a new one. And understand that Nietzsche himself has also pointed out the fact that the modern Mensch is not necessarily opposed to the opium of religion. That's what I already described previously, because he doesn't understand it, he doesn't get it. He perceives or even repeats the idea that it's bad because it's a way to disconnect you from life. But he doesn't see that he's doing the exact same thing with the means I already described. Rather, what he has entered into is a sort of apathism. He's just indifferent to the idea of religion altogether. So, this is also the difference between an active and a passive atheist. Most people watching me right now, if you are an atheist, you're most likely a passive atheist. It means that you don't believe in God, but it's because you don't really believe in anything. It's a sad state, by the way, because if you watch the videos I made previously, you have been pushed into an environment that made you this way. You've been, in a sense, robbed of something that could have been precious for you. But it's interesting, and it's much more prevalent and much more symptomatic in active atheists. I don't know if you've ever listened to people who are like on a crusade against religion. Listen to their words. It's insane how closely related they are to religious people, meaning that it truly seems that they are actually, man, I keep sniffing because of pollen and I look like a cocaine addict. They are absolutely opposed to the idea of religion, but at the same time, it looks like they're preaching for their own church. And that's for a very simple reason. Atheism is a type of religion. I spoke about that. It's the natural continuation of Christianity. The God of science is really the God of atheism. Does it mean that atheists believe in nothing? No, they believe in something. They believe in that new meaning, that new explanation of the word. And so, even though the modern Mensch is sometimes disdainful towards the uncleanness of spirit that accompanies religion, something that, again, you've heard a ton, people who compare religious people with a type of mental illness, or like, oh, they don't believe in science, they don't believe in things that are proven, and all of that is seen as very unclean. It's seen as something that you must stay away from. But paradoxically enough, the modern Mensch is also not able to actually emancipate himself from morality and from the remnants of religion around him. And therefore, he is always timidly deferent and grateful for it. All feelings, by the way, born into, and that decisively keep him apart from the faith. So, it's something I've observed as well. Even in countries that have given up on their religion, they are still connected to religion, but that connection is mostly toxic and mostly detrimental. They have a weird awe in the face of religion and of old churches and buildings of worship, but they don't know exactly why, and they have no users for these places in the first place. And that is what we spoke earlier before with the Schopenhauer case, the fact that even though he was someone who repudiated God, he was still connected to God. And it's why also all of the atheist efforts to disconnect from religion are worthless. It's because they will never be able to. The imprint of God on this earth, of the ancient God, is way too present, to the point that sometimes you even mistake him with this new modern God. It's because they share characteristics. But the issue is that this rejection of religion that is also accompanied with a certain type of fondness for it leads also to a certain level of tolerance of the educated man. And this is, by the way, one of the main tenets of this modern God, the God of modernity. He is the God of tolerance, but it's a tolerance that is found in naivete and ignorance of the lineage that created that tolerance. Because keep in mind that the modern tolerance, the humanist tolerance, is a direct creation of Christianity. It's taken directly from it. Just today, I was looking at a video of someone who was complaining of the fact that a certain group was promoting certain values that were humanist, but the issue is that they were promoting them because they were a Christian group. And I stopped for a second and thought to myself, okay, so you're complaining because humanitarian values are promoted by Christianity. Are you dumb? Don't you see that all of your humanism comes from Christianity? It came directly from it. It's a perverted form of Christianity. Again, it's morality without faith. But of course, because these people and most modern world are completely ignorant of their lineage, they are unable to do that. And therefore, they espouse values that come from religion, while at the same time being convinced that they are above the religious man. And that is a characteristic of the modern man, of the atheist, of the Mensch. He thinks he's better than the religious man because he has evolved past him. But I've already proven that it's not the case. He is just the same as the religious man. The only thing is that he ignores himself. He doesn't know where his beliefs come from. He believes to be the next evolutionary step of the religious man. But that is just the hubris of the modern man, that according to Nietzsche is the little arrogant and mob man, the sedulously alert, head and hand drudge of modern ideas. The man that thinks that new means best and that progress rhymes with success, which of course it doesn't. But try to explain that to a modern man. Try to sit down with someone and tell them, hey, you deciding what is regressive and progressive is entirely based on your subjectivity and in reality closely aligned to what Christians of 300 years ago believed. You are just the same as them. Why do you think you are so much better? They would be incapable of telling you why, or they'll tell you, well, I don't believe in God, even though they do believe in God. It's just that their God has no face, their God has no churches, their God is, in a sense, camouflaged. It's the truth, and it's what happens with most false idols. They don't wish to actually reveal their faces, because if they took away the mask, you could see them for what they truly are. Now, deep down, there is also fear of the unknown, which the religious man seeks to explain, while the atheist simply denies. And this is why I keep saying also that atheism is religion, but worse. Because at least with the religious man, there is that fear of the unknown that is present with every single human being. But religion tries to come up with answers. Atheists, if they cannot come up with an answer via science, just deny it. And just say, oh, it's not a thing. Like life after death, not a thing. Why? Science cannot prove it. But again, the vision that God provides to you allows you to actually grow your understanding of the world. So if God cannot provide that vision, it doesn't mean that the world that you cannot perceive doesn't exist. Because by that token, that would also mean that planets and universes that we cannot perceive right now because we don't have the means don't exist. And that should be something that is immediately seen as stupid. I don't want to go into the discussion about science and the stupidity surrounding it, but it's part of Nietzschean philosophy. He doesn't go into such details, but you can always sense that it's looking underneath the surface. Now, it's also, in a sense, the human condition that I question when I discuss these things, because when you try to explain the world and when you try to give meaning to human existence, you have to also examine it to a great extent. And it's what we see nowadays with this modern world. Religion, to a great extent, as I said, tried to explain the human condition. It tried to dive deep underneath the surface, and what it came up with was God. But more than God, Satan, demons, sin, which truly shows also that religion was fairly on point. Like Christianity, for example, was fairly on point. It didn't try to present man as an ever good or ever bad being. It presented us as gray. The issue is that we lost that gray morality and it became black or white at some point. But the foundations of a successful understanding of the human psyche were present, meaning that religion was in reality one of the first forms of psychology, or at least I personally firmly believe that. Now, the issue is that has also mostly went away, because when you refuse to actually observe things you cannot explain via the means of your God, this means also that the human condition is going to be mostly undiscovered, and in a sense, this explains the hyper-superficiality of this modern world, this cult of the self that is perfectly explained by the fact that because the God that we actually worship nowadays is of plastic, he himself doesn't have much depth, he himself doesn't have much volume. And because we make God after our image, but we turn into the image of God, we have turned into beings of plastic as well. And this is why I insisted on the fact that God is made of plastic. He is a buoy. He is a buoy that is present to help us prevent from the unlucky dive beneath it. Meaning that we have created something, the God of happiness, the God of kindness, the God that is going to prevent us from feeling pain, who is not going to judge us, who is not going to make us question our condition as humans, as a mean to prevent us from having to face these realities. And this is why the God of modernity is anti-nature. It's because he's exactly the opposite of nature. And therefore there is also no surprise that the cities and the environment that this God would create and the architects that work after this God would be so lifeless. Towers of concrete, the disappearance of trees and green. Why? Because we are making nests that resemble us. It is not just technological advancement that made us live in small huts, 800 years ago. It's also who we were inside. And therefore, we, in a sense, shape the environment into who we have became or become. I don't know which, if it's the past tense or the present here. But that is important to keep in mind. Now, this unlucky dive beneath it, at least in the way Nietzsche describes it, is what humans need to do to be able to discover themselves. And it's the difference between individualism versus introspection. It's the reason why also individualism as a term, as a name, is poorly coined, is because you could think, okay, I'm individualistic, so I'm only going to worry about myself. Well, that's not even true. Because most people who are hyper-individualistic barely know themselves. Why? They stay at the surface level. So in a sense, we should call it selfish individualism versus introspective individualism, which are not the same thing. The second is actually quite good because it creates strong humans that create strong communities. But it's not what we see nowadays. So next time you describe a Western country, understand that you're describing a country that is made after the image of the modern god, the god of plastic, and therefore it's not an individualistic country. It's a selfishly individualistic country, and there is a difference because I think that the dichotomy between individualist and collectivist doesn't take into account the evolution of the individual within the Western sphere. Again, it's something that maybe some of you are going to ask that I explore more. I made a video about individualism if you're interested. For now, we're just going to keep rolling. Now, this falsification of one's own image serves to enjoy life without being encumbered by truth. So this is what we've done to ourselves as well. We're beings made of flesh. Originally, if you look at, again, the ancient times and ancient faith, we're beings made of light turned into beings of flesh, and now we're beings made of plastic. And why do we plastify ourselves so much? Why do we try to, in a sense, denature ourselves so much? Well, it's because this way we can falsify our own image and we can enjoy life. If we stop looking at nature, if we stop looking at what we truly are, this also means that we finally get to stop looking for a meaning and for a reason for existence. And this is when the opium of hedonism steps in. This is when we can enjoy life to the fullest. Carpe diem. What is that mindset? It's the mindset of renouncing profound interrogations and just focusing on the pleasures of the flesh. Whatever falls best right now is what I'm going to do right now. Most people nowadays live like this. This is this modern world. This is a mean of worship. The best way to worship the new God of modernity is to do away with all types of spirituality and just engage in an endless pursuit of pleasure, which allows one to enjoy life, again, without being encumbered by truth. A truth that is just too much, man. We don't want to face that truth. We don't want to have to know that maybe there's more to life than just feeling good. It's better to just stuff our faces, become fat, consume drugs, watch TV, and turn into Mensch. Keep in mind that these people are, on a surface level, very happy. They're full of happy hormones and they're nice and fat. Deep down, they're miserable. But because they never connect with what is deep down, they're not even aware of that. And because their God is not making them feel bad anymore about being sad sacks of shit, well, their life is actually an endless succession of joys. That is the ungrounding of man from his biological soil that we have seen with this modern age. And again, I described modernity as anti-nature. It's not just anti-nature, it's anti-biology. It's anti-us. It rejects our very nature as humans. It tries to present us as something else. We are evolving, and we even try to present as something good. Oh, we are moving away from the biological conception. Men are so much more than that. And you see that nowadays with many questionings of gender, of everything that used to make who we were, that were directly linked to biology. Why? Because if you can free yourself from the links and the constraints of biology, you can stop being human, and therefore you can be freed from the human condition and be finally free from pain. More than the pursuit of pleasure, what people truly want is the escape from pain. That is what their hearts truly desire. Now, how much time do I have left? Okay, I'm not doing bad. I'm not doing too bad. All right. So as I was saying, this is this ungrounding from the biological soul. Now, this ungrounding is a revenge against nature. Right? I'm not going to go into that again. It's the transvaluation of morals I described previously. It's the endless continuation of the slave revolts. The slave have never left the world, they're still there, and they have an a never-ending list of revendications. Revendications that they make against who? Nature. They want to take their revenge against nature. And what best revenge against nature than to denature themselves? Because they are children of nature. But they hate themselves so much that their goal is going to be devoured by mosquitoes, and also to not be recognizable anymore. They're going to modify their shape to the point that you will not be able to tell they were once children of God, aka children of nature. They will look and try to resemble their new god, the god of plastic, as much as possible. And that is going to be their new set of morals. It's the reason why also it's so stupid to try to separate morals from religion. We have a new set of morals nowadays, but it still comes from a religion, the religion of modernity. And this is why we are stuck with the situation that we're dealing with nowadays. A situation that Nietzsche prophesied a long time ago. He saw what was coming. He was able to predict the age we're going to engage. An age where we still have religion, but now it's entirely damaging. There is nothing good to it. And it has produced the type of man, the modern man, that has no redeeming quality whatsoever. Because keep in mind one thing. Religion was a theater. It was grandiloquent and forced for the purpose of taming man and offering new meaning to his life. There was cruelty in religion 100%, but it was done with a certain purpose in mind. It was done in a way to reshape man into something greater. Now, Nietzsche disagrees with that. You will see later that he thinks that this was a mistake. But what came afterwards is even worse. What came afterwards is the child of that period that we call modernity, that is now just a giant circus. Absurdity is still present. It's still, the world that we live in is absurd, but without meaning. There used to be absurdity in faith and in religion. Yes, religion is absurd. Most of the teachings are absurd, but they came with a meaning. To this day, we still follow rules, the rules of the system that is around us and constricts us, that we don't understand and that also don't make any sense, but there also is no meaning to it. And that is the reason why the contestation towards the system will never end, but will never lead to actually anything beneficial, because we're just going to replace it with something with even less meaning, with even more absurdity. And as religious world interpretation minus faith equals pessimism, as I said in the first part, the beautification that used to be the goal of religion also turned into mortification, because without meaning, without the ability to interpret the world through the religious length, we are left without anything. We are left, again, with all of the bad things that religion gave us, that the slave kept, because the slave, again, took away everything that was good with religion because they couldn't actually face it. The acceptation of pain, the absurd faith, the ability to understand that things are greater than us, that some things are out of our scope, all of that went away and we are left with the remnants, we are left with the rest. And this is why the beauty that was in this world is slowly fading, it's slowly disappearing. It's because the world is dying. Why is the world dying? Because the God that we serve is a corpse. It's already dead, it's never been living, it's a machine. We are the children of the machine, and it's the reason why we also, as humans, have less life in us. We are less and less vital, and more people are seeing that. More and more people have perceived that there is something rotten in the room, but they don't know where it's coming from. I have the answer for you. It's coming from your entrails. You are the thing rotting in the house. And if you want to be able to take away that smell and to actually revigorate yourself, there needs to be a decision made. And this decision, according to Nietzsche, is the ability to diagnose what I just said, understand why modernity is, in a sense, a skeleton, it's a corpse, and find a way out, find a way outside of the coffin, and find a way to actually regain your independence and regain a faith. A faith in what? I don't know. God, if it works, whatever else, but faith and hope, true hope, and not the type of word renunciation that is simply mortification and that leads to the destruction of the spirit. Now, next time in 2 weeks, we are going to continue on this rampage, and I'm going to continuously explain to you the Nietzschean vision of the world, this time with a direct analysis of the European man. I'm going to go full Hyperborean spirit. We're going to talk about the spirit of the race, And I'm going to tell you exactly what Nietzsche said about, again, Europe, what happened to the European man, and I'm also, of course, going to rely to religion. So consider that today was mostly a theoretical dissection of the modern man, and next time we're going to actually get deep down into the trenches, and it's going to be fully practical so as to paint exactly the picture that was in the mind of this genius. Thank you for watching. Have an excellent night.